as we wrote in the invitation emails and on our social media. It's indeed a great pleasure to do this program today, where we'll talk about a book that's being talked about all over the country. And we have none other than the author of the book who is here to interact with you all. To begin with, may I invite on stage Dr. Dileep Padgaonkar, who will chair the program, and Dr. Sanjaya Baru, author of the book. Please. It's my pleasure to stand here and introduce the chairperson of the program as well as author of the book. Many of you would know both of them, but for the benefit of everyone in the audience, allow me to introduce both the speakers. Am I audible far at the end? Sure, thank you. Dr. Dileep Padgaonkar would chair the session today. He joined the Times of India in 1986 as its executive editor. In 1988, he was appointed the paper's editor. He served as an editor for 6 years at Times of India. He has been a member of National Commission for Minorities and the chairman of the group of interlocutors for J&K, and that was appointed by the Union government. In November 2012, he relocated to Pune, which is where he was born in 1944. In Pune, he serves as a trustee on board of Pune International Centre, and he chairs the program committee of PIC. He also serves as R.K. Lakshman Chair Professor at the Symbiosis International University. Dr. Padgaonkar continues his association with the Times of India as a consulting editor. And he's also a member of the editorial board of the World Post. World Post is an online publication jointly partnered by Huffington Post and the Berggruen Institute of Governance. He is the recipient of Legion d'Honneur, France's highest civilian award, for his contribution to journalism and India-France understanding. Thank you, Dr. Padgaonkar, for agreeing to chair the session. Let me introduce Dr. Sanjaya Baru to you. Dr. Sanjaya Baru is one of the India's most respected and influential commentators on political and economic issues. Including today, you would have read his column in one of the national dailies. Dr. Baru was the official spokesman and media advisor to the Prime Minister of India from May 2004 until August 2008. He is a former editor of various national dailies, especially the financial newspapers. His association included with Times of India as an associate editor at Economic Times, as the editor with Business Standard and Financial Express. Dr. Sanjaya Baru has been a professor at ICRIER in New Delhi and also a member of NSAB, the National Security Advisory Board in Prime Minister's office. He's also been associated with various prestigious think tanks in India as well as abroad. He is the author of Strategic Consequences of India's Economic Performance, and this book was launched in UK at the IISS in April 2007. And The Political Economy of Indian Sugar, and that was done in 1990. Of course, many of you would have read his earlier book, The Accidental Prime Minister, and today we are gathered here to talk about 1991, how P.V.Narasimha Rao made history, and that's the book we'll be talking about today. So thank you so much for coming here today. Before I begin the next steps of the program, may I also introduce the audience to you. In the audience, we have members of Pune International Centre. We also have members of CASS, the Centre for Advanced Strategic Studies, members of various chambers of commerce, and we have students and faculty members of some of the member institutes of PIC. And last but not the least, general Punekars who would find any of such discussions very, very interesting to kind of come over and attend to. So that's the audience for you. To begin with, may I request Reshma to please bring the copies of the book that we would release, and we'll request Dr. Padgaonkar to release the book, make it a Pune release of 1991, How P.V.Narasimha Rao Made History. Please put your hands together as we release. There is one thing that needs list of coordination, and that is two colleagues who have been editor at Times of India. So I'm going to get down and get my seat, and I'll request Dr. Padgaonkar to please chair the session and continue the proceedings. So.
Hello. Okay. I think I might as well do my own little bit of introduction, because Sanjaya Baru can best be described as a Dasha Avatar. He has, as you've been just told, professor, economic journalist, editor, columnist, advisor to a prime minister, research scholar of these avatars, but which are extremely personal to me. One, he's been a very much appreciated colleague of mine in the Times of India. And above all, he's been a good friend. So these are the Dasha avatars of Sanjay, which doesn't mean that I'm going to spare him. Let me begin, Sanjay, first of all, by saying that there have been 3 books recently which try, with some success, to undo the neglect of P.V.Narasimha Rao's role in giving a new direction to India's macroeconomic policies and to India's foreign policy. And this was long overdue. There has been neglect for a long, long time. The books ought to have appeared much earlier. So my first question is, quite apart from the fact that the Nehru-Gandhi family sought assiduously to minimize PV's role, why is it that authors, academics, chose not to do what you have just done?
Thank you, Dileep. I think that's a very important question. When this book was released in Hyderabad a couple of weeks ago, I spoke on this issue. If you look at the literature on 1991, many economists have written copiously, both in academic journals, in the media, their books. There's a lot of writing on the economic reforms, the crisis of 91. So the economists have done their job. We do not have a single political scientist who has done an analysis of the politics of 91. It's quite surprising. I mean, even analysts of foreign policy have written on the end of Cold War and the change in India's thinking, the look east policy, look west, etc., etc. But on the politics of 91, the only book I could get was a collection of newspaper articles by Professor C.P. Bhambri of JNU. And I paid tribute to him in this book. But political scientists in general, in my view, in this country, have become so obsessed with theory, with battles on ideological issues, that they have just forgotten politics on the ground. There are, in fact, in general, very few books on political evolution in India. Only recently, for example, there's a book on political families, Kanchan Chandra. But if you look at the total gamut of writing on Indian politics, it's very limited. So therefore, I'm not surprised. It's not as if people have not written only on PV. They have not written on so many other phenomena in Indian politics that I think I would argue that political science as a profession in India has failed academia.
And yet, 1991 ought to have attracted a lot of scholarly attention, because as you quite rightly say right at the beginning, 91 was the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi. 91 was the final implosion of the Soviet Union. 91 was also a year where, after Lal Bahadur Shastri, you had a congressman taking a political route which was a deviance from the family's stranglehold of politics. So I would have thought that both internally and externally, there were factors that would have persuaded people to take a little more attention. But my question is, you hinted that in your book, which is that some of these early steps towards economic reforms and foreign policy reforms were taken also by Chandrasekhar as Prime Minister. So the question is, had Rajiv Gandhi not cut short Chandrasekhar's term, would Chandrasekhar have tread the path that PV tread?
Well, you know, unfortunately, Chandrasekhar is not around, so I've not had the opportunity of talking to him. But I've spent some time talking to both Naresh Chandra, who was the cabinet secretary at that time, and to Yashwant Sinha, who was the finance minister at that time. Narasimha Rao came very much from the tradition of the 60s and 70s, and that there was an ideological shift in terms of recognition of the ground realities. For example, and I mentioned in the book, when the episode of the United States using India as a landing pad for aircraft, Naresh Chandra as cabinet secretary briefed him and explained to him, he immediately understood what was happening. And then when the Congress party criticized him, he refused to stop. So the refueling, which started on 9th January 1991, went on till 25th February 1991. Though through this entire period, the Congress party was protesting, Rajiv Gandhi had made public statements criticizing the government. There are articles written in the media. In fact, one of the things I did in writing this book was to go back and read through the newspapers of that year, Times of India, Economic Times, Hindu, and there were columns published in the Times of India, and you were the editor at that time, by many of our foreign policy wonks in Delhi, criticizing Chandrasekhar for allowing refueling of American aircraft. But he understood what was happening in the world. There was a recognition of the shift. The Soviet Union had not yet collapsed, but the Berlin Wall had fallen. The shifts in Europe were happening. So I think you can see from all that on foreign policy, Chandrasekhar was very much in tune with the thinking that Narasimha Rao then picked up. On economic policy too, I mean, he was completely opposed to the idea of mortgage of gold. But then he finally went along with it. I think the only issue on which there is a big question mark, and I've not been able to get an answer, and maybe Dr. Kelkar would have an answer, is on the whole issue of devaluation. Because if you remember, even Narasimha Rao balked on devaluation. Because in Indian politics, the memory of devaluation goes back to 66, 67, when Indira Gandhi tried to devalue and there was a huge ruckus. And so as a politician of that era, both Chandrasekhar and Narasimha Rao would have been familiar with what happened in the 67 devaluation episode. Narasimha Rao also was not very keen on the sharp devaluation that Manmohan Singh and Rangarajan then undertook. So there's some question mark whether Chandrasekhar too would have resisted that. But I don't think on any of the, and secondly, on the fiscal correction, it was Yashwant Sinha who in his memorandum to the IMF in December 90 as finance minister committed India to that correction. So the correction that finally happened in July through the budget that Manmohan Singh presented was a commitment we had already made during Chandrasekhar's time. So I would tend to give benefit of doubt to Chandrasekhar. Though in Delhi, in some of these conversations on my book, people have, I think it was Chidambaram at my book launch in Delhi who rejected the idea that Chandrasekhar would have done any of the thing. He said there's no way Chandrasekhar would have done. And since Chidambaram spoke after Yashwant Sinha at my book launch, Yashwant Sinha couldn't get back to him. But there were people who reject the idea that Chandrasekhar was a liberalizer.
There is a little ambiguity in my mind about precisely this whole episode of the US planes refueling in various airports of the country, particularly Bombay. When you say that Chandrasekhar was very angry when Naresh Chandra told him what the position was, that is a bit of a surprise to me, because as you recount yourself, at that very point, you had two very senior officials of the government of India in Washington, where Gopi Arora was on the board, trying to get IMF help. So the Prime Minister knew that one of the quid pro quos involved would have been to allow these planes to refuel. This is one part. The other part is, the Times of India was the first newspaper to have carried a story of a US plane landing in Bombay. And we published it together with a picture. I had a call at home that morning very early. And that time Chandrasekhar was really very, very angry. And I heard him out. And I said, Prime Minister, would you have preferred that a Chinese newspaper or a Pakistani newspaper published their story rather than an Indian newspaper? And he finally cooled down. But that still doesn't answer my question. Why was he angry when Naresh told him about this fueling business? We needed the IMF desperately at that time. And I think you mentioned your own visit to Gopi's office, where you saw these two gentlemen. So surely at the highest level of government at that time, you knew what the stakes were.
Well, you see, the facts are like this. The negotiations with the fund happened in December 90. But I think the reason why Chandrasekhar was taken by surprise was that on 9th January, there was this American plane that was flying across from Philippines to Jordan. And the plane asked for permission to land to refuel. And the air traffic control in Bombay agreed to allow the plane to land for refuel. There was no prior intimation to the government of India on that landing. And the reason why air traffic control allowed an American military aircraft to land, which we know now from I.K. Gujral's autobiography, is that it was I.K. Gujral who, as Prime Minister, as Foreign Minister during VP Singh's time, had signed an agreement with the United States that would allow American military aircraft to land for refueling. And Gujral, in fact, mentions in his autobiography that he never imagined that the Americans would actually do it, which is rather odd. But that is the permission that the Americans used to land at the last minute. There was no prior intimation. And what Naresh Chandra told me, and which is in the book, is that it was the IB that informed Delhi. It was the intelligence chap in the Bombay airport who saw this American military aircraft landing and called up bosses in Delhi. And that is how the cabinet secretary of the day got to know. So I guess Chandrasekhar was also angry because he was hearing this for the first time. It was not as if there was already some understanding and this was happening as part of an understanding.
I now come to the time when the Congress Legislative Party elected P.V. The suggestion made in your book as well as in Vinay Sitapathi's biography is that the family loyalists eventually agreed to back P.V. because they thought he might be easier to manipulate given his advanced age and state of health than someone like Sharad Pawar. Was that the strategy of the loyalists? Did the loyalists not know the kind of following that Pawar commanded in the legislative party? There again is a bit of an ambiguity, and I'll give you a little more detail after you answer this question.
Well, the fact is that the first decision, which was to make Narasimha Rao the president of the party, happened very smoothly. It happened within 24 hours, 48 hours of Rajiv Gandhi passing away. There was this meeting of the CWC. Sonia's name was proposed, and then an emissary went to her. She said, I'm still in mourning, and even refused to meet the emissary. So the senior most member of the CWC was Narasimha Rao. So out of pure seniority, he became president of the party. And from various other accounts of that period, including Fotedar's autobiography, the view is that Narasimha Rao suddenly realized that he had a chance to become Prime Minister. And that from that day till June 21st, he worked at it. Now, the fact is that there are several others who also thought they had a chance. Pranab Mukherjee, Arjun Singh, Sharad Pawar, and they were all obviously operating parallelly. I have not done the research to find out what each of them was doing, but I've read Arjun Singh's biography, I've read Sharad Pawar's autobiography, I've read Venkatraman's autobiography, and if you piece together the story in all these autobiographies, it's clear that various people were trying, but as June 21st approached, PV was ahead of the race for several reasons. I think one important reason was the fact that this Venkatraman and Karunakaran, one from Tamil Nadu, the other from Kerala, played an active role in mobilizing the southern MPs in favor of Narasimha Rao. There was a certain north-south feeling, and the south was not willing to support Arjun Singh. It then boiled down to Pawar and PV, and I think PV used his Marathi familiarity with Marathi to strike a deal with Pawar, which he finally did. And
before that deal was struck, something happened, and which you state in your book as well as in the Sithapathi's biography. At one point on the 20th, you enter his room, he's all alone, and you go there because that very morning, the Times of India has carried a report saying that Pawar had thrown his hat in the ring. And PV's answer to you is, well, why don't you ask the Maharashtrian editor and the Maharashtrian political reporter of the Times of India what they have to say. Now this is, I must confess, I was taken aback by this, because throughout this time, whenever Mr. Narasimha Rao had asked me about this whole Pawar challenge, I had said he doesn't have the numbers. I had also said that this is a ploy for him to get a plum job in the next government. And he had hinted as much in a very long interview that he had given me and published on the 1st of June. That's roughly 3 weeks after you met him. And where it was very clear that he was absolutely sure that he would be the next Prime Minister, whether he spoke of economic issues or foreign policy issues. So I don't know where this Maharashtra bit came from, and perhaps the only living person who was privy to all of this is, doesn't live in Pune, he lives in Nagpur, and this is Ram Khandekar. Because Khandekar knew all along.
Khandekar was very much there when I was with PV that morning.
Well, there you are.
Yeah.
So this business that because I'm a Maharashtrian, I would necessarily back Maharashtrian is, I think, a bit odd.
No, that's not the way he
I've
said
never
it.
looked at politics in that way at all.
No, that's not. I don't think that was his suggestion at all. Don't forget, he was speaking to me, Hyderabadi. I was with him talking in Telugu. I mentioned in my book my association with him through my father.
Your father's time, yes.
Yeah, so I was asking him in Telugu. The conversation was not in English. He said, editor is a Maharashtrian, reporter is a Maharashtrian, paper is a Bombay paper, what else will they say? And it was said in a light-hearted way. And I mentioned that we all laughed. When he said that, he laughed, I laughed.
And Khandekar laughed.
No, Bhagwatja Azad laughed. Actually, there was a witness to this conversation, which was Bhagwatja Azad. He was sitting there. He also laughed. So I don't think he said it in a serious accusatory way that you are being pro-Maharashtrian.
No, to come back, to one portion of the book which I thought needed to be highlighted, and I'm glad you've done it, which is that so much attention was focused on Manmohan Singh's first budget that not enough attention has been paid to something that happened earlier in the day of the budget, and which is the presentation by P.J. Kurian, Minister of State for Industry, who tabled a statement in the House that effectively dismantled the license permit Raj. And of course, the senior minister at that time was P.V.Narasimha Rao. So the question is, how did PV summon the courage to depart sharply from the commanding heights of the economy credo that had dominated Indian discourse for several decades before?
Well, I have a slightly complex answer to that question, which I want to develop maybe into a full book, which is that don't forget, even when in the 80s, when PV was already a foreign minister, home minister through the 80s, the 80s was a period of transition, particularly in Andhra Pradesh. My early research, when I was teaching economics in the 80s in Hyderabad, I wrote several papers on the Green Revolution impact in South India, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Karnataka, and Maharashtra, and the rise of agrarian capitalism. And Maharashtra is a good example, the whole sugar lobby. But so did we have in Andhra. And it was, I don't think it was a coincidence that Indira Gandhi appointed Jalagam Bengal Rao as her industries minister when she came back as Prime Minister in 80. And the trade minister was also from Andhra at that time. This was the period of a major transition in the southern economies. and the rise of a new business class, which later on, I mean, all these GVK, the Reddys, the Raos, the Kamma capitalists who backed NTR later, this was the decade of change. PV was fully aware of this. So it was not as if he was some old-style congressman who did not know what was happening on the ground. And I think there's a need. This is again an example of the failure of political science. No political scientist has analyzed the impact of this transition in the developed states of India on the politics of that. There is some work on the impact of sugar, particularly in Maharashtra, on Maharashtra politics. But in general, the agrarian transition. Second factor is, of course, that by the time he becomes Prime Minister, he's already aware, as he was a member of the cabinet, of all the discussion going on, the Abid Hussain committee report, the Narasimham committee report, the Challaya committee report, the various reports, the Montek's paper, etc., all the economists in government or the policymakers in government were writing about it. So he was not ignorant, he was aware of all of this. The clincher, of course, was the fact that on the day he became Prime Minister, and I've mentioned in the book, when Naresh Chandra gives him this 6-page document on state of the economy. And Naresh Chandra has mentioned this. I think even Vinay Sitapati has quoted him, and I have quoted him also. PV read the whole thing and sat down and said, look, okay, what do we do? And what is significant to me, which I draw attention to, which neither Vinay Sitapati nor Jairam Ramesh, who's written the other book on PV, neither of them have drawn attention to, is this his address to the nation on 22nd evening, right? 21st he becomes Prime Minister. 22nd June evening, address to the nation on Doordarshan was a speech entirely written by Naresh Chandra and Narasimha Rao. No third person was involved in drafting that speech. And if you read that speech, everything that he wanted to do is there, including industrial reform, trade policy reform. He's telling the country the world is changing. He's drawing attention to the collapse of, the changes in China, the reforms that had already happened in China. That's the other influence, sorry, I forgot to mention. As foreign minister, he was aware of what was happening in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in China. So here was a man who knew the world was changing, understood the nature of the crisis, and decided that this was an opportunity to begin that change. So I actually think that PV was an activist Prime Minister and not simply signing on the dotted line as he's been projected, particularly in Jairam's book. Jairam's book's argument is very simple. Rajiv Gandhi did all the thinking, Manmohan Singh did all the implementation, Narasimha Rao only signed to the files. I don't accept that argument.
Well, you're quite right not to accept it, because it seems to me that there are two elements in that chapter soon after PV becomes Prime Minister. Two reasons, I think, for the subsequent success of his prime ministership. One was, look at the economic team that he put together and the foreign policy team that together. I think I'd like to remind the audience that this was a remarkable team at that time, because other than Manmohan Singh, he had Rangarajan, he had Montek, he had Ashok Desai, he had Geeta Krishnan, he had Y.V. Reddy, Subbarao, etc. And of course, as far as foreign policy is concerned, he had Mani Dixit. And in the PMO, you had the likes of Shyam Saran, Damodaran, and Ronald Sen. And I think we have one ambassador present here who's also closely associated with PV, that's Prakash Shah. But that was in his earlier tenure as External Affairs Minister, I think. So this is one. Also, his choice of the Principal Secretary is very important, and you mentioned that in your book, and that was Amarnath Varma. So I think the choice of the people who advised him was particularly, showed a great deal of savvy. But the other thing, and which goes counter to what Jairam Ramesh says, is that once he chose his team and once they agreed on a certain policy line to follow, PV took it upon himself to back them politically. And I think you put it very well, even in the context of Manmohan Singh. He says a finance minister is a zero, but you have to put a number before it, before the finance minister begins to make sense. And that number before it is the political support that I give. So I think you've done pretty well, even in Vinay Satpathi's thing. This question of bringing together the extraordinary talent in both economic matters and foreign policy matters, and then giving them the political backing, which I don't think subsequent prime ministers ever did to a lot of things. So, do you think, and this is of course speculative, do you think PV's successors ever learned a lesson from this way of operating?
I think Vajpayee did. I mean, look, when you think of Mr. Vajpayee's tenure, you think of the nuclear tests. And I think one lesson that Vajpayee learned from PV, which Narendra Modi did not learn, is whatever you want to do, whatever you want to be remembered by, do it within the first few weeks or months of getting into the job. Because then all the forces that you have to battle with gather momentum later. Vajpayee did the nuclear test within 1 month of becoming Prime Minister. So I think that is one lesson, that you hit the ground running. Don't waste time, because those who don't want you to be in your office will start operating against you, and they get time on their side. I think in the case of Manmohan Singh, he took his own time. He was a far more stable government in 2004. But at one level, he was a far more stable government. At another level, it was a very tricky relationship with the left. But his legacy was something that he again did in the first 1 month. He becomes Prime Minister in May 2004, and by June, he's already sending emissaries to Washington to start the whole nuclear dialogue. So again, he started that in June. It just took 4 years to finish it. But the process started immediately within 1 month of, and so you'll ask the legacy question. Narasimha Rao's legacy, economic change, within the first month. Vajpayee's legacy, the nuclear test, within the first month. Manmohan Singh's legacy, the nuclear deal, within the first month. Right. So I think that is where I commented that I think Mr. Modi, I don't know what he wants his legacy to be in his first term, but within the first year he wasted it.
Well, I see one legacy could be Achhe Din Aayenge. That's after 3 terms in office. I do want to differ with you on one point. I mean, I think you're perfectly right to be critical of the whole of the Gandhi-Nehru dynasty on the Congress. But there's a sentence in the book which I thought was a case of overreach. And I'll tell you what the sentence is. On page 115, you write, and I quote, Indira Gandhi returned to power as though she had a divine right to rule India. The fact of the matter is that the Janta experiment was a miserable flop. That in the meantime, her PR sense was far, far ahead than anyone else. And if you see the kind of majority that she obtained at that time, where was the question of divine right? It's the people who elected her.
Well, no, what I meant, it's a way of putting it. I think what I mean is that in 1980, her return, in my judgment, convinced her that this was destiny. I mean, you got thrown out, and within 3 years you're back. Nobody expected her to come back. And this was destiny. And I think the decision she took during the emergency of inducting her son, which was at that time resisted within the party, resisted within her inner circle, P. N. Aksar and P. Andhar, etc. It was still a tentative move. I don't know if she thought of Sanjay Gandhi as the next Prime Minister. But when she came back in 1980, she definitely was convinced that Dynasty is the future. And which is why the moment Sanjay dies, Rajiv is brought in. And Fotedar's book, if you read, she asked Fotedar, according to Fotedar, when Sanjay dies, who are the prime ministerial, men of prime ministerial caliber in the party? And it's not very clear whether she says this to Fotedar or Fotedar says this to her. But he says that we agreed on 3 names. Pranab Mukherjee, R. Venkatraman, and P.V.Narasimha Rao. These are the 3 names that she saw as potential prime ministers one day. And then Fotedar says, then I told her, but madam, your party, you have to bring your son. There's nobody better than Rajiv ji. And then he says, she immediately agreed with me. You know, so it was not as if she needed too much thinking. Oh yeah, there are three gentlemen, Narasimha Rao, Pranav, you're suggesting Rajiv, let me think about, no, she's, according to him, she immediately agreed, and of course she was there. So in that sense, I think the whole dynasty begins then. And mind you, Dileep, there is not a single political party in India in 1980 which had yet adopted that family dynastic principle anywhere in the country. Not one. All the dynasties we now see, whether it's Mulayam's family or Sharad Pawar's family or Chandrababu Naidu or Chandrasekhar Rao, whatever, Jayalalitha in a manner of speaking, all these came after.
With two exceptions, as you say in your book, the BJP and the left parties.
No, meaning the dynastic principle in Indian politics is post 1980. There is not one political party in India before 1980 where a political leader said, after me, my son or my daughter. No. It is Indira who starts it.
And what does it say about Indian democracy? This whole business of dynastic rule.
Well, I mean, it's not a subject I've thought about in this book, but as a general kind of question, I think we are now living through a period of questioning. I think what the victory of Mr. Modi has done across the country is really to bring this whole thing into question. And I think what is happening in UP is an interesting thing. I do think there is increasing questioning of the idea of succession through family.
Okay, towards the end, Sanjay, what I want to do is to go slightly beyond this book. There's a sentence which you put up very early and which again figures in your conclusion, namely that like every other politician, PV has his highs and his lows. And obviously 91 showed PV's highs more than his lows. People who have written about this book of yours have been critical on two counts. The first is that P.V.Narasimha Rao was the Home Minister when the anti-Sikh riots took place. Secondly, he was the Prime Minister when the Babri Masjid was fallen. These are clearly lows in his life. So, do you think that in order to get an overall picture of what was undoubtedly one of the great prime ministers and great statesmen of our country, you also need to take into account these lows? Because no matter what, just a year before, India had to undergo two kinds of traumas. One, when VP Singh agreed to the implementation of the Mandal report, and two, when Advani undertook the Rath Yatra. So these two, I think the consequences of these two are still being felt here today. How then, when you look back, if you were to write another book this time about the politics of that era, together with the political economy of that era, would you take these lows into account as well?
Dileep, first of all, every Prime Minister has his highs and lows. We recognize both when we come to an evaluation of the person. Nehru has not been erased from public memory in this country, despite his handling of Kashmir, despite his handling of China, 62 war, despite in some ways also his handling of the economy in the later half. Nehru had many lows. You could even argue despite his handling of the immediate post-partition situation. We think of Nehru as a great Prime Minister. Indira Gandhi has not been erased from public memory, despite the emergency, despite what she did in Punjab. Rajiv Gandhi has not been erased from public memory, despite what he did in Sri Lanka, despite Bofors. No, and despite 84, where he was the Prime Minister. Narasimha was the Home Minister, but Rajiv was the Prime Minister. So every Prime Minister has had pluses and minuses. And yet, public memory, particularly the Congress party memory, has only celebrated these prime ministers. And yet, because of 92, more than 84, Congress party doesn't talk of 84, 92, they erased him from history. He's not there in the official history of the Congress party. So, that is what I'm questioning. I'm not saying that Narasimha Rao only did good things. Of course, once you're in politics, whoever you are, even the best political leader makes mistakes and messes up things every now and then. But I think it's the overall assessment. His own party deliberately erased him from public memory and the history of its own party's history on the plea that he did something politically unacceptable, which is Babri Masjid in 92. On 84, Vinay Sidapati has recorded the fact that Narasimha Rao was told by the Prime Minister's office, you don't bother, we will handle the situation. Now, you can argue he should have then resigned, saying, I'm the Home Minister, I will take charge. But you know the Congress party, you know Rajiv's rule at that time, 400 plus MPs, you know that is not, he wouldn't have gone into the history books if he had resigned in 84. You know, it's okay, one can have an academic argument. And he allowed Arun Nehru and Kamal Nath and Jagdish Titler and all these goons to basically take over the streets of Delhi. But that was, the command was from Rao. So these are all, you want to beat someone, there are many sticks you can beat with. You know, every single prime minister or every single, you can beat with the many sticks. The purpose of my writing this book is to make the point that for all his mistakes, the guy also did something he's worth remembering for. And the fact is that till now, we've almost forgotten him. The party completely forgot him, but in general, public memory also, I mean, very few people remember what happened in 91. So, therefore, it's important to remember those without denying his failures or his mistakes.
But I'm also glad that in your book, like in Vinay Satpathi's book, you've set the record straight about what happened on that fateful December day when the Babri Masjid was brought down.
Right.
I mean, this is a canard that has been spread right from the beginning, that while the demolition was on, PV was enjoying his siesta. And I can tell you this is absolutely bunk from end to end. There were people constantly in touch with him. Yes, he was isolated because he felt let down by the cohort of Swamis and Gurus and VHP types. He had relied on them, and it transpires that he should not have trusted them so much, taken precautionary steps. But the fact is that he was soft. He was a soft Hindutva man. I think is hopelessly incorrect. And I say this with some authority because 3 weeks, a little under 3 weeks before he became Prime Minister, he as Congress President gave me a very long interview, and it was published on the 1st of April, where thrice in the course of the interview, he said the alternative to the Nehruvian line is fascism. And he dwelt on it. Because I asked him, I said, why are you also desperately clinging to the Nehru-Gandhi family? And he was very subtle in his response, where he said, well, it is really a certain Nehruvian ideology that inspired me when I was young, and this inspired me again today. Whereas any deviation from that overall line, which means making sure that economic progress benefits the poor first, making sure that the diversity of this country is respected, and so on and so forth. So he was, he was very, very convincing on that score. So to end, Sanjay, what I'd like to tell you is, like all people one knows, PV was also a very complex man. And the complexity derives partly, at least I think, from the fact that he was multilingual. He was fluent in several languages. He read extensively. I think the one thing he treasured most when he had finally decided to go and retire in Hyderabad were his books, thousands of them. And a man of reason, of thought, very much at home in ancient Sanskritic traditions, but also in modern thought, European thought. And yet, what is it that compels such people to seek the company of a Chandraswami or an astrologer like N.K. Sharma let alone a combination of the two, which is Subramaniam Swamy.
Well, you see, first of all, every politician has his, what are they called, godmen, right? In my earlier book, Accidental Prime Minister, I mentioned the fact that we used to get reports in the PMO about the number of havans Advani was doing to become Prime Minister. And there's a very nice joke there. I don't know if those of you have not read the book. Once I went to Manmohan Singh and told him, sir, Advani is doing some havan. So Manmohan Singh said, you know, these havans, you need to know your date of birth and the star and all that, isn't it? So I said, yes. And he said, but I don't know what my date of birth is. How does he know? Because in his case, his mother died soon after, a few months after he was born, or weeks after he was born, and nobody remembered the date of birth. His official date of birth, which is 26 September, is the date that his grandmother gave when he was being admitted in school, which was at the age of 4 or whatever. When the school admission, they said date of birth, she gave some date of birth. And that became his official date of birth. So he said, they don't know what my date of birth is, so these havans will not work. So everyone has their godman, everyone does this business. In India, it's very common. I don't look down upon any Indian for a little bit of this hocus pocus. I think politics is an extremely insecure profession. We have to recognize that politicians are, at the end of the day, very insecure people. And they are holding at straws. They don't know tomorrow, today they are there, tomorrow they could be there. And grant them that insecurity, grant them that security that godmen give. Now, as far as Chandraswamy was concerned, as you probably know from reading Natwar Singh's book, he was in the company of Margaret Thatcher. I mean, who is Narasimha Rao to keep him at a distance? Margaret Thatcher was consulting Chandraswamy. Encasing again, I mean, astrologer, all of us love to show our hand to find out what is going to happen. So these are all guys that hang around politicians, and I don't think the one insinuation made against Narasimha Rao, which I completely reject, is that these were all characters who were in part of money collection and that he was a corrupt prime minister. There I have only one simple argument. You look at every Indian politician, the day he becomes an MLA or an MP, the property that politician has when he becomes an MLA or an MP, and look at the property he and his children have today. Simple. And you know who's a corrupt politician and who's an honest politician. Narasimha Rao's property, the day he was packing up his books and going to Hyderabad, and even after he died, I mean, look at the way his children live today. They're middle class families. None of them has flats in Dubai and in Singapore, and like most of our politicians. So I think at the end of the day, he was, whatever the characters who were hanging around him, I don't think he was by the Indian standards, I would put him in the category of, unlikable sort of character.
Well, I would like to end this and then take questions from the floor by telling you, Sanjay, that one reason why we in Pune hold PV in thrall is because for a while PV was a Puneri. That's to say, less than 2 kilometers from this place where we are now discussing your book is Ferguson College. Many of us in this room are Fergusonians, and Ferguson has had the very odd luck, to put it simply, to have given India a great Prime Minister and a miserable Prime Minister. The great Prime Minister was P.V.Narasimha Rao, and the miserable one was V.P. Singh. So I'm delighted that you've written this book. I urge all of you to read it very closely. Some more light will be thrown on the years that P.V.Narasimha Rao was Prime Minister. Fortunately, one of his biographers had access to his diaries, but I have pleaded with his personal secretary, Khandekar, who kept copious notes himself and was very, very close to him, to at some point also put the record straight. Because where I completely and entirely agree with you is that not just the dynasty, not just the party, but many of our academics and our scholars have neglected this person who's, even among prime ministers, someone extraordinary for the kind of background he came. And when you find out from his biography that his first visit to the West was when he was in his early 50s. It's only then that he discovered the outside world. So a remarkable man, a complex man, a good prime minister, and we do hope that the kind of policies that he initiated, the others have been compelled to follow, regardless of the ideological positions. So I do congratulate you on a book. We now have approximately 25 minutes to take questions. Please do raise your hand, say who you are, and then we move forward. I see one hand, two hands, okay, three hands. I know that third hand very well. Okay, so let me begin with Amit, and then I'll come to you next.
Thank you, Dr. Baru. Look forward to reading your book. I have read your previous book, The Accidental Prime Minister, like that. Wanted to ask you if you can shed a little bit of light, maybe you've already talked about it in your book, about PVNR's legacy when it comes to specifically science and technology and defense-related policies. I remember reading in one of the extracts, I don't know if it was your book or the other book, where in the 80s, or I think it was before he was the Prime Minister, he actually saw computer, PC, for the first time, and very quickly picked up basic programming by himself. So anything that you could share on his science and technology and his defense-related outlook?
See, if you have read Vinay's book, he has a substantial sections on that particular. He was, don't forget, defense minister, and we're very familiar with the nuclear program. And we know from various sources now that he wanted to test in '95, and then finally handed over that legacy to Mr. Vajpayee. But beyond that, I mean, in this book I don't discuss defense or science and technology because I've tried to deliberately focus on '91. And his preoccupations in '91 were very much political, economic, and the immediate foreign policy challenges of the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Okay, yeah, please.
Very good evening to you. My name is Vinayak. I would like to actually ask you two questions. I don't know whether we have time for it. You started off the discussion stating, or rather saying that how Narasimha Raoji's rule was undermined. Everyone talks about the reforms of 1991, the economics associated with it, but no one talks about the political aspect of it. And I think there is a reason for it. Right from 1989 to 1991, the economic situations leading to the mortgaging of loan, the balance of payment crisis, I think IMF had such a stranglehold that even if there was some other politician, Prime Minister, in place of P.V. Narasimha Rao, he would have had these economic reforms. The magnitude of reforms could have been different, but these economic reforms or the liberalizations, they were like forced upon by IMF, whether for good or bad is a different reason. That could be one of the reasons why Narasimha Rao's rule is slightly undermined by the political analysts. I would like to hear your views on it.
Several people like Dr. Kelkar in government were talking about various policy changes. So none of these ideas was new. The fact is that despite having 400 plus members in parliament, Rajiv Gandhi did not have the political courage to implement any of these ideas, any of these policy changes. Because he was constantly worried that he would get what we call pro-rich or pro-business image. It was a failure of political leadership. I have talked about that in this book. And then comes VP Singh. VP Singh was also fully briefed on what to do, but he did nothing. Then comes Chandrasekhar. By the time Chandrasekhar is Prime Minister, things get to the point where we need a loan from the International Monetary Fund. The major demand of the International Monetary Fund was a reduction in the fiscal deficit. But that was an idea which had been around for some time. I mean, many economists in India were writing that this fiscal deficit is too high, we need to bring it down. I don't think the IMF had come forward with any suggestions that were different from ideas already in India. The fact is that if Chandrasekhar had been allowed to present his budget, or Yashwant Sinha had been allowed to present his budget in February 91, we would not have had the balance of payments crisis. The likelihood of a default would not have been there. That was what worried Indian government officials, right? There was no major concern about going to the fund. After all, Indira Gandhi went to the fund in 81, and we are talking of 90, just 9 years later. So I don't think there's any inhibition about going to the fund for help. The real inhibition was about default, because India had never defaulted. And we now know from a lot of accounts which have been written by people in government at the time that we were on the verge of default day after day after day. And R. Venkatraman has written in his book that he told Rajiv Gandhi, don't pull the Chandrasekhar government down till the budget is approved and the IMF loan comes through, because otherwise there's a threat of default. And yet Rajiv Gandhi pulled the Chandrasekhar government down. And from that day, which is what, 5th of March, 6th of March, 91, till the 21st of June, March, April, May, June, 4 months was an extremely critical time for India. Because, we had the mortgaging of a total of some 47 tons of gold in 2 tranches. But the fact is that that was a very, very difficult time and required astute political management. And I credit both Chandrasekhar and Narasimha Rao. In fact, 2 chapters of this book are devoted to what Chandrasekhar government did in that period. So I credit both of them with astute political management. And that is something to be celebrated. Why should you, imagine that somehow they were doing something terrible and therefore we should forget him? On the contrary, India was saved the ignominy that several Latin American countries, several African countries, and several Asian economies, much later in 97, etc., went through of defaulting and rescheduling loans, etc. All of that was prevented. So I don't see any reason why we should have any qualms in celebrating the political leadership of that year. As he said, multilinguist, read European literature, listened to Hindustani music, which we know from Vinay's book, that he loved to sit at home and listen to Bismillah Khan and Hari Prasad Chaurasia. He had several affairs. He had terrible relations with his children. His eldest son, first of all, his children didn't love him because they felt he was not generous to his wife, that he had betrayed his wife. But more than that, his eldest son felt that he hadn't got anything from the father. When his eldest son had his heart attack and was in a hospital in Hyderabad, when Narasimha Rao went to see him, he said to him, "Have you come to check whether I'm alive or dead?" And my father was there. Narasimha Rao walked out of the room with tears in his eyes and said to my father, "Vittal, I hope you never live a day when your son asks you that question." He's a very complex man, very human, very simple in his living. Whenever we visited him, I used to visit him, he's always in a, what they call banyan in North India, and lungi, veshti. That's how he was always at home. So he was not and then as I mentioned in my book, he was a politician like most of our politicians, who squatted on the floor and ate with his hands. And therefore in Delhi was very much an outsider. In fact, in some other context, I said that it's ironic that he called his book fictional autobiography, which he wrote. The title of that was The Insider. But he was the ultimate outsider, in a manner of speaking. I mentioned a couple of examples which I was a witness to. He used to come to JNU when I was a student in the early 70s. And one of our political science professors, Professor Rashiddin Khan, was from Hyderabad. So he was my local guardian in Delhi at that time. So I used to go to his house very often. And I used to see PV there. PV used to just hang around JNU campus, professors' homes. Bimal Prasad was the other professor that PV works. Then there was once Republic Day, January 1975. I was a student in JNU and we went to see the Republic Day parade. And since we were students, we got there early, found a couple of chairs, we were sitting, 3 or 4 of us. And I saw Narasimha Rao standing because by the time he came, there were no chairs. And this is 1975. He had already been Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh. But he was just standing there and watching the parade. I actually then went up to him and offered my chair. So in many ways, he was a simple guy. Simple living, high thinking. He read a lot. He was, as you said, he had thousands of books in his house. His fatal flaw, and this is not from my knowledge but from my father's, is he never built lifelong loyalties. He was a loner. I mean, the very fact that his own children never felt that kind of sense of loyalty. In fact, I blame his family for the cover of Vinay's book. And I've said this in Hyderabad, that there was no reason why Sonia Gandhi should have figured on the cover of an autobiography of Narasimha Rao. You look at Half Lion, the Penguin book, the cover has Narasimha Rao and Sonia Gandhi. There's absolutely no reason for her to figure on that book cover. It's a disservice to his memory that she should figure on the book cover. But, problem is, there were not many people that he left behind who felt that sense of loyalty towards him. So he never really built. And Congress party, Jayapal Reddy once said to me, recently, he was in Delhi and he said to me that, I have only 2 gurus in my life. One is your father and one is Narasimha Rao. So I said to him, what have you done for Narasimha Rao? This was 2 months back. He said to me, one of, Narasimha Rao, only 2 gurus. And I said, you call him a guru, what have you done for him? I have at least written a book, what have you done for him? So, nobody felt that sense of loyalty of doing something for him.
Babri Masjid, demolition issue. Mr. Narasimha Rao built a kind of legal file by making Kalyan Singh file affidavits after affidavits saying that he could not demolish it. But a politically astute person like Narasimha Rao, one finds it difficult that he would trust a BJP person so much that he will have affidavit only as his safety for Babri Masjid.
Explaining something that he tried to do as Prime Minister is Narasimha Rao. No other Indian Prime Minister has written a book after being Prime Minister. Nehru wrote a lot of books before he became Prime Minister. There's a book of Narasimha Rao on Ayodhya, on this one issue, where in great detail he has explained. There's the Liberhan Commission report. You please read those reports. What are the options? Impose President's rule? What happened to this Mr. Modi's government in Uttarakhand after imposing President's rule? Same thing would have happened there. The Supreme Court would have struck it down. There were no constitutional basis for imposing President's rule. You had to trust an elected government, whether it was BJP or whatever the political character of that government, it was an elected government. Not Mulayam Singh, it was Kalyan Singh. He trusted an elected government. The cabinet met repeatedly and never discussed the issue of President's rule, which is there in his book. Arjun Singh can write what he likes. Arjun Singh was a member of that cabinet. At no cabinet meeting did Arjun Singh suggest to the Prime Minister, let us impose President's rule. Never. It's all on record. So, what is it that you expected him to do? He went along with the trust. Many in the BJP didn't think, Atal Bihari Vajpayee said, he didn't think that actually the demolition would happen. There was a certain momentum to the events of the day, and what happened, happened. I don't think there is any evidence to suggest that he conspired in it. The fact is, an event happened. Some people regard it as unfortunate, some people don't regard it as unfortunate, but at the end of the day, it was a political turning point for the Congress party. So be it. So I cannot see why we should assume that Narasimha Rao conspired in the bringing down of the Babri Masjid. At the end of the day, whether in 1984 or in 1992, the government of the day was incompetent. But incompetence doesn't amount to conspiracy.
I might just add a couple of lines to what Sanjay just said. On the 7th of December, the day following the demolition of the masjid, the Prime Minister gave an interview to Doordarshan where he explained at considerable length the constitutional complexity that was involved. That to say, he would have had to count, of course, on a report given by the governor to the effect that, the law and order machinery has broken down and therefore the centre has to act swiftly. No such report ever came to him. So on what preemptive basis would the centre have intervened? It's around this question that he spoke at some length. He spoke for about 7.5 minutes. You might ask, how do I know? Because I was the one who interviewed him. And he then answered very many supplementary questions precisely on his role. And that includes, how is it that he trusted Kalyan Singh? And the answer was, do I have any option but to trust an elected representative of the people? So, it's complex. I personally, my own assessment is that his was a case of overreach to these Sangh Parivar types, but that constitutionally, he tried to be as circumspect as possible. That's the impression I get. Okay, we have time now for 2 more questions.
From the bottom of my heart for taking us back to 1991, because that was the age I was in my diapers. I mean, after today's lecture, I would definitely say that I was born in the age when P.V. Narasimha Rao made history. So coming back to the question, during a previous talk, you asked me one question that, how do you see Congress's future? Now, I would like to revert that question back to you. How do you see Congress's future? Thank you.
I've written a column a couple of months back when Mamata Banerjee was re-elected as Chief Minister. I wrote a column in the Economic Times saying that the only hope for the Congress today is if Sonia Gandhi issues a general notice to all congressmen, wherever they are, to please come back to the parent party and hands over the party to Mamata Banerjee. I mean it seriously, because today in the country there's only one person from a Congress background who has a mass political base. Before Mamata Banerjee, it was Y.S. Rajshekar Reddy who died. There is no other congressman even Sharad Pawar does not have the kind of mass base today as what Mamata Banerjee has in Bengal. She has established her mass base. You need a political leader with a proven mass base to challenge the BJP. After all, what was Mr. Narendra Modi's strength vis-a-vis Alke Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, Yashwant Sinha, Sushma Swaraj, Arun Jaitley, and all those who were running the BJP in Delhi? Mr. Modi's strength was he had a mass base. He came and took over the party and gave it power. So if the Congress wants to come back to power, it has to have a political leader with a mass base. Rebuild it from below. And I cannot think of a second name who can do it apart from Mamata, because she is very much a populist. Because it's a different matter that the day the column appeared, I got an invitation card for her swearing-in ceremony, which I couldn't go to because there was no ticket in the invitation card. So I couldn't fly to Kolkata. But obviously she liked the idea. But short of that, given the existing leadership in the Congress, There's no future. There's no Lok Sabha leader for the Congress. I mean, Mallikarjun Kharge, Kamal Nath, Jyotiraditya Scindia, these are not future Prime Ministers of India. Anand Sharma. You look at the Lok Sabha front Congress benches. There's not one person in that Lok Sabha in the Congress who can say, I can be the future Prime Minister. So the party has to revive itself. And I have repeatedly argued that India needs two national political parties, like all good democracies. We cannot allow a situation where there's only one national political party and a large number of these caste-based, community-based, language-based political parties, which is today's reality. Every single one of the regional parties either revolves around a caste or a language or a community. The only national parties are BJP, the Communist Party and the Congress. So I do think Congress should revive. But then it needs a leader. Right now I don't see anybody inside the party who can lead it.
Raj Babbar? Yes, please.
So this is Pratibha Chandran. Sir, I wanted to ask you, because you said there was no dynastical politics before 1980 in many of the parties, most of the parties rather. Now looking at the situation, what is happening in Uttar Pradesh currently, or overall, the dynasty is ruling most of the, nationally also and most of the states, the voter probably drifting away from these kind of dynastic families who are ruling and may have another choice in the future elections coming.
But others have to go through. I mean, for example, my own home state of Telangana now has a family that looks at perpetuating itself internally. But, maybe they'll be there for a couple of terms and then change will come.
Okay. Yes, please.
Sir, I want to ask you one question related to Mr. Narasimha Rao's perceptions, insights. In any country, over a period of time, there are pent-up forces which are waiting to be released to make the country differently. Did he have an insight into the kind of pent-up forces in industry, education, technology, which have prospered post-1991? Did he have a feel for it?
Yeah, I thought I had answered that question earlier. I've said yes, because we come from the state of Andhra Pradesh, the United State of Andhra Pradesh, which was in many ways a hothouse of change in the 80s. That was the period in which the impact of the Green Revolution, the impact of investments in education, etc., were being felt. And all these new business groups which are now, building the airports in Bombay and Delhi, etc., they're all coming up in the 80s. And I did mention the fact that, even Indira Gandhi chose someone from that state as an industries minister in 80. So, and certainly Maharashtra too, and Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, peninsular India was going through a major transformation in the 80s. And I think Narasimha Rao, as a politician from this part of India, he was familiar with Maharashtra, not just Andhra Pradesh. In fact, in my book I mentioned traveling with him to Aurangabad once, when he came to Aurangabad for a meeting, for condolence meeting for one of his gurus who had died, and he came to speak, and I was given an appointment to meet him on the plane, so I flew down with him and flew back. But he knew what was happening in peninsular India, certainly. I don't know if he was as familiar with North India or even Eastern India, but he certainly was familiar with peninsular India, and therefore, you need to understand the kind of change happening in the 80s, which saw fruition in the 90s. I give you one statistic in my book. You look at the top 100 companies, 1970, 1980, 1990. The data is there, more or less the same names, right? Birla, Tata, Modi, etc., etc., yes, more or less the same names. Then you see 1990 to 2000, complete change. Complete change. There are some one or two names are still there, like the Birlas and the Tatas. But you look at the number of new names in 2000 in the top 100 companies. That is the decade of change. And I can't imagine that an intelligent political leader like him was not aware that this is what is happening in India.
Okay, I'm sorry, we have time only for 2 questions, but let me first get to Amit and then the last one there.
First of all, congratulations, fantastic book. I enjoyed every page of it, philosophy. One question comes to mind that given that P.V. was such an intellectual and such a perceptive person, did he stop short at just reacting to the IMF pressure? And did the reform really not got implemented? Is it that not enough was done to ensure that the policies could also get implemented without too much of a hassle? Could that be one reason why he's not remembered as much as he should have been remembered? And these kind of questions come after reading your book. That, okay, that was a fantastic year. Despite so many hurdles, we did what was required to be done and we did right. But did we stop short of that? At that? And did we not follow it up later on? I say this because just so happened that I was out of the country and came back in '94 late. The first thing it hit me was that corruption was kind of accepted. And coming after 6 years back to Delhi, I also discovered there was something called MP Lab, local area development, where the MPs could use 1 crore each without really anybody really asking any questions. So this would be counterproductive to an efficient economic reform. So we see some mixture of good and not so good. Would you like to comment on that?
First of all, as I said even earlier, there's a famous statement of Joan Robinson: every statement about India and its opposite is true. Right? So we are a complex country and everything happens. Therefore, you can talk about the positives and negatives in the same breath. By suggesting that in '91 we did some important policy changes which were good for India, I'm not suggesting that corruption was removed, etc. So I would not make a black and white statement. But the point I'm making, sir, is that almost every single policy decision taken, not just in '91, but in that 5 years, because there were several others. I mean, telecom liberalization happened later. And we remember the corruption of telecom liberalization, right? That minister who was there, money was found under his bed, Sukram. But the fact is that is the opening up of the telecom sector that has made a huge difference to this country in the last 20 years. The simple point I'm making is that whatever was done in that period has not been reversed. And every single major political party in this country has been in government, either inside the government or supporting the government of the day in the last 25 years, including the left. The left supported VP Singh government, it supported Gujarat government, it supported Manmohan Singh's government. BJP supported VP Singh's government, and it implicitly supported Narasimha Rao in the first 1.5 years. So and of course it was in power itself with Mr. Vajpayee and later. There is no political party of any consequence that has not been in power in New Delhi. And yet nothing that was done then has been reversed. Therefore, the conclusion I come to is something historic was done in that year and subsequently, which has changed this country. And the process began essentially with Narasimha Rao.
Okay, one absolutely last question because we've got to close the session. Go ahead.
My name is V.N.
Yes. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
I was in Delhi during 91 to 93 at the ICSSR
and I was observing the developments which you have elaborated in your book. I want to ask you, 1992 there were Bombay riots, and at that time Sharad Pawar was also defense minister in Narasimha Rao government. Now, the story is that he was sent back to manage Maharashtra state during the turmoil. Was it because Narasimha Rao saw it as the best opportunity to get out of cabinet, or he thought defense is in danger if Sharad Pawar continues, or Sharad Pawar wanted to go back to Maharashtra and not serve under Narasimha Rao?
So first of all, I recognize you, Sir Professor Dhanakre. I remember very much you were in ICSSR. Thank you for being this evening here. I think we used to meet in IIC in those days in Delhi. So we have to enter Narasimha Rao's mind to answer that question. I don't think there's a intelligent, I don't think there's an informed answer to your question. But I can tell you what people around Narasimha Rao used to say. Because I knew several, one of his media advisor was my uncle, P.V.Narasimha Prasad. So their view, these are chaps who used to work in the PMO in those days, their view was, boss ne kya, Chanakya, he got rid of the only challenger. Because Pawarji was one of the competitors for Prime Minister. He said, look at this, what a brilliant move he has made. He sent him off to, he has made him a chief minister. One of the many chief ministers, removed him from Delhi. So at least his own people used to think that boss did something very smart. I have no idea what was in his mind or Mr. Pawar's mind.
Do you think Sharad Pawar missed the bus that night?
Sharad Pawar.
Well, I can just add something which I experienced that time, because the Prime Minister called a few senior, a few editors of newspapers and a few senior correspondents to say that he will be briefing us on the situation in Bombay. He must barely have spoken 6-7 words to say, I'm glad you've come, etc. And then he asked his press advisor, your uncle, to put the line on to Mr. Sharad Pawar. So Mr. Pawar came on the line and he said, well, I've got all these editors and journalists out here and I want you to brief them about what's happening. And he says, well, since we don't have these facilities which are now available, I'm passing on the phone to someone. You explain that what's happening to this person, and he in turn will brief all the others. So that was done. The person whom Mr. Pawar spoke to was me. So I partly Marathi, partly English. And then he says, well, I hope now you've got the complete picture. Mr. Pawar is doing a good job there. He's going to stay there for a while, etc. When we were coming out, all of us, we saw a delegation from the film industry in Mumbai walking in. And I knew a few of them. So Shabana said, well, how did it go? So I said, well, it went up pretty well, but after you finish, you ring me up so we can compare notes. An hour and a half later, I rang up Shabana. I said, look, what happened? She said, well, we all went in, and the Prime Minister spoke just 6 or 7 words, and then said, it is best that you be briefed by Mr. Sharad Pawar. So he asked his press secretary to put Mr. Pawar on me. Mr. Pawar came and he said, well, I've got all these major people from Bollywood here, and I'd like you to brief them yourself. You're on the spot. I know you're doing a hard job. You'll have to continue for a while. So I'm passing on the phone to Shabana Azmi. So I said, this is Shabana telling me. He said, after the whole thing was, I hope you're really satisfied. So now it's best to allow Mr. Pawar to do his job well. It's a very hard task, you all know. And I hope you're satisfied the government is doing its best, etc. The Chanakya bit came there. He himself did not commit himself to anything at all other than to hint, or more than hint, that Mr. Pawar would be in Mumbai for more time than is required. Okay, I think we are at the absolute end of our thing. I'd like to thank Sanjay, I'd like to thank all of you. I often wonder, one day I hope someone will tell me, each Prime Minister is remembered by one or two quotes. Tryst with Destiny speech and so on and so forth. And I kept on wondering all the time, which is the quote which we shall remember as far as Narasimha Rao is concerned. Now, this is something which he mentioned to various people who met him, including me at one point, and then I found it figures in certain books. And the quote is as follows: not to take a decision is also to take a decision. And I think this is absolutely, it is a very, very deeply Indian way. And I'm not being jocular at all. I think it's a very Indian way, which says in substance that in the end, what pays very often is patience. You see? So he was a Chanakya in a sense that he used his reserves of patience to a large extent. And he also, he came from the grassroots level. He had his experience of politics was really from bottom up, so to speak. And I'll just end by telling you, at one time, one of our meetings, I said, suddenly everyone is dancing on you, and former bureaucrats are writing columns and so on and so forth. He said, not to worry. I've just decided to put two of them on a delegation going to the UN General Assembly. And then you come back to me 2 weeks later to see what they write in their columns. So I think he was extremely, at one level, extraordinarily shrewd, very shrewd. But at the other end also, he certainly was pushed by a vision of India, which has changed India in very, very significant ways. And that, I think, is the thrust, the sum, and the substance of Sanjay Baru's 1991. I now invite Prashant.
A huge thanks for Dr. Baru and Dr. Padgaonkar, the two gentlemen, the two editors who saw it all, who experienced it all, who participated in it all from those close quarters, right? And you all made those moments alive. Few of them were in nappies, few of those were in school, few of those were working, few of those were serving in the government. But for, I guess, one and all, you kind of brought those memories alive and gave your own viewpoints behind those memories and a lot of data points. As Dr. Baru was saying earlier before the lecture, he went to the library to study for 3 months before he wrote this book. And I was asking him, like, having lived this through, it could have been just writing one column sitting at one place. He said, yes, I lived through all, but it was 3 long months of studying it before I did that. And we could sense it in the book. I picked up the book, Dr. Baru, and it's one of those few books, I could just read it in one go. Just few pages left for the next day, but almost in one go. So in that sense, it's really unput-downable book. So thank you for writing that, and I'm sure that many of you would enjoy reading it. The books are kept right outside this hall. So those of you who would like to buy it could buy that book. And we'll be requesting Dr. Baru to spare a few minutes so that he could autograph and interact with the readers. So hopefully that's okay, sir. We also have a lot of you attending the program today. We have Dr. Vijay Kelkar, who has been there in Delhi while all of this happened, contributed to many good things that happened there, as you know. He is Vice President of PAC. And so now that you're here, could I just trouble you to please come on the stage and hand over a tiny bit of appreciation to Dr. Baru. So some memory of Pune that you could, some monuments of Pune that you could take home. Dr. Kelkar, is there anything that you'd like to add, mention?
I just want to add my vote of thanks to Sanjay. Absolutely outstanding evening and sharing this book with us. I'm going to speak on something else because it just triggered memory of 2 other forgotten people. I think perhaps maybe they're in your book, but I think should be mentioned at least in terms of who made the history. One is Mr. Amarnath Verma, and second Mr. Narasimhan, who was that time, not M. Narasimhan, S. Venkataramanan, who was the Governor of the Reserve Bank. And these 2 people, perhaps as important, if not more, to what Mr. Narasimha Rao did.
And I think Mr. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan had a good division of labor. One managed politics, the other managed the economics. And I think somebody raised the issue about IMF. I think the beauty of our reforms has been really, I mean, one must applaud Narasimha Rao and Manmohan. It was done far more cleverly than what IMF team would have proposed. And India is one of the few countries which decade after decade has increased the growth rate. No other country which meant the IMF program has done it. So it's not just IMF. I think he's absolutely right. It is far more homegrown part of it. And Dr. Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao should get full credit for whatever they achieved, and I entirely with you. So once again, now next book I would request you, because you have written about now 2 prime ministers, on Manmohan, and I think you should write on Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the 3rd prime minister, who probably would also merit your attention in terms of his economic reforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you one and all for coming and attending this program. Many, many thanks.